Nobody expected the police to show up on a quiet Tuesday morning. Nobody expected the HOA to make that call. And absolutely nobody, not the officers, not the neighbors watching from their driveways, not even the HOA president herself, expected what happened when that front door slowly swung open. What they saw changed everything. And once you hear what was inside that house, you'll understand why this story went viral overnight. Arthur Mitchell was 74 years old and had lived in the same house on Cedar Ridge Drive for 41 years. He'd raised 3 kids in that house, buried his wife from that house, and fully intended to take his last breath in that house. He had a porch swing, a garden that took up most of the front yard, and a dog named Buster who was technically too old to do much of anything except sleep and look adorable. Arthur wasn't loud. He wasn't rude. He waved at neighbors, paid his taxes, and kept to himself. By every reasonable measure, Arthur Mitchell was the kind of man you'd want living next door. But the Cedar Ridge Drive HOA had a different opinion. The problem started, at least according to the HOA, about 8 months before the police showed up. That's when Brenda Kensington became HOA president. Brenda was the kind of person who considered a recycling bin left out 12 hours past pickup day to be a personal attack. She had a spreadsheet. She had a laminated copy of the community guidelines. And from the moment she drove past Arthur's house and saw that garden overgrown, beautiful, wildly alive with sunflowers and tomato plants and climbing roses, she decided it was a problem. The first violation notice arrived in Arthur's mailbox on a Thursday. Unsanctioned landscaping, vegetation exceeding approved height limits. Arthur read it, set it on the kitchen counter, and went back to watering his tomatoes. He'd dealt with HOAs before. He figured it would blow over. It did not blow over. Over the next 6 months, Brenda sent 11 more notices. Notices about the garden. Notices about Buster's doghouse being 4 inches too tall. A notice about wind chimes. A notice, and this one had Arthur genuinely laughing out loud about the color of his porch swing cushions, which Brenda claimed were not within the approved color palette for outdoor furniture. Arthur's daughter, when he told her about that one over the phone, was considerably less amused. Here's what nobody on that street knew yet. Nobody knew what Arthur had been doing inside that house for the past 3 years. Not his neighbors, not Brenda, not even his own kids. Not entirely. And that detail, that secret, is the reason this story goes somewhere nobody saw coming. Brenda called an emergency HOA board meeting in month 7. She presented her spreadsheet. She showed photos. She had timestamps. The board voted to escalate, to pursue formal action, and, if necessary, contact local authorities about what she was now calling a hazard property. Arthur received a certified letter. He signed for it, read it at his kitchen table, and for the first time, he didn't laugh. He picked up the phone, okay, but not to call a lawyer. He called his grandson Leo, who was 26, sharp, and had just finished a degree in urban planning. "Come stay with me a few weeks," Arthur said. "I might need a witness." The morning the police came, it was cold and gray, the kind of morning that makes everything feel more serious than it might otherwise be. 2 officers arrived in a patrol car just after 9. Brenda was already outside, in her driveway, arms folded, wearing a look that suggested she considered this her personal victory lap. A few neighbors had drifted out onto their porches. Buster barked once from inside, then went quiet. The officers knocked, waited, knocked again, and then the door opened. What the officers saw stopped both of them mid-sentence. One of them actually took a step back. Because Arthur's house, every visible wall, every surface, every corner that they could see from that doorway, was filled floor to ceiling with what looked like an unbelievable, impossible amount of documented history. Framed photographs, blueprints, laminated maps, stacked binders with labeled tabs, handwritten logs going back decades, and in the center of the living room on a large folding table was Leo, laptop open. Documents spread across every inch, looking completely unsurprised to see them. "Good morning," Arthur said, calm as anything. "Come on in. We've been expecting someone." Here's what Arthur had been doing for 3 years inside that house. He'd been building a case. Not against Brenda, not exactly, though that was coming. Arthur had spent 3 years meticulously documenting the history of the Cedar Ridge HOA. Every bylaw change, every meeting minute, every fee increase, every enforcement action. And what he found, what he and Leo had spent weeks organizing into a formal complaint, was extraordinary. The HOA had been operating without a valid state registration for over 2 years, meaning every fine they'd issued was legally unenforceable. More than that, the approved color palette Brenda had been citing in her violation letters. It had never been formally adopted by the board. It existed only in Brenda's head and on a document she created herself without a vote. Arthur handed the officers a manila folder. Inside was a 30-page documented report, already filed with the State Attorney General's office, the county clerk, and a housing rights nonprofit that had, as of 2 days ago, agreed to take his case pro bono. One of the officers looked at the folder, then at Arthur, then back at the folder. "Sir," he said slowly, "we were called out here for an unsanctioned garden." "I know," Arthur said, "and I'd love to show it to you. Best tomatoes on the street." The next few weeks moved fast. The HOA's violations against Arthur were dismissed entirely. The state launched a formal review of the HOA's registration and financial records. 2 board members quietly resigned, and Brenda Kensington, who had once sent a certified letter over wind chimes, found herself on the receiving end of a formal cease and desist. But here's the part that nobody expected. The second twist that made this whole story something else entirely. When the housing rights organizations started digging, they discovered that Arthur wasn't the only one. There were 14 other residents on Cedar Ridge Drive and the surrounding community who had paid fines to this HOA over the past 3 years. Fines that were, under state law, completely illegitimate. 14 families. Some of them had paid hundreds of dollars. One family had paid over $2,000. Arthur organized a neighborhood meeting in his garden and quietly told every one of them what they were entitled to get back. Buster slept through the whole meeting, but Arthur smiled more that afternoon than he had in years. The garden is still there. The wind chimes still hang on the porch, and the cushions on the porch swing. Still absolutely not within any approved color palette are the brightest, most defiant shade of yellow you've ever seen in your life. And somewhere, in a filing cabinet that is perfectly organized and completely terrifying, Arthur Mitchell has a folder with your name on it, just in case.